To learn more about earning college credits with study hall courses, go to gostudyhall.com or click the link in the description. How many times a day do you think about the President of the United States? Some of you might not give much thought to POTUS, while others of you are devoting a lot of mental energy to the guy. And that probably depends on a lot of different factors, like where you live, or what kind of job you have, or what kinds of political issues you're especially interested in. If you wanted to, you could be thinking about the president a lot. You could set up social media and news notifications so that you're following the president's every move, not just politically, but also personally. You can keep tabs on their pet adoptions, golf games, books they're reading, and favorite summer jams. All day, every day, we have access to so much information about our leaders. But this is a pretty recent phenomenon. 30 years ago, no one was carrying around stories about the president's dog in their pocket, unless for some reason they cut that story out of the newspaper. And that change in technology doesn't just affect how often we think of the president, it affects how we think of the president in general, and how the president thinks about us. Hi, I'm Chris Vasquez, and this is Study Hall Power and Politics in US Government. Historically, it wasn't really a priority for presidents to be able to directly communicate with the public. In fact, back in the late 1700s, George Washington decided not to travel or communicate with his constituents during his presidential campaign, because it wasn't proper. It's not like he had any competition anyway. But that set a precedent for later candidates, at least for a few decades. Instead of going door to door to ask people to vote for them, which seemed below the office of the president, candidates relied on their political parties and allies to campaign on their behalf. Parties published pamphlets, organized rallies or events that the candidate didn't even attend, and even sometimes produced songs that celebrated them, like my go-to karaoke song, Huzzah for Madison, Huzzah. But eventually, candidates had to get more involved. The gossip mill of the 1800s US society could rival any celebrity PR strategy, with candidates spreading rumors by word of mouth and publishing disparaging pamphlets on their opponents. And voters were curious about the candidates' opinions on important issues, like abolishing slavery and expanding into the West. So to counter any damaging rumors from their opponents and explain their views, candidates started to make themselves more open, communicating more directly with the public. And as usual with this time period, by the public, we really just mean the white guys who could vote. For instance, while campaigning for the 1840 election, William Henry Harrison and Martin Van Buren both pushed campaign strategy boundaries. Harrison campaigned in person for several weeks, and Van Buren published letters explaining his stances on different issues. And in the late 1800s, candidates began inviting people to their personal homes to talk with them as equals. Known as front-porch campaigns, this strategy allowed candidates to reach the public in a controlled way, without becoming overexposed. During the 1896 presidential race between William McKinley and William Jennings Bryan, Bryan's strategy was to interact with the public as much as possible. He traveled by train to give 600 speeches around the country. Meanwhile, McKinley stuck to the front porch approach, which isn't to say he just sat at home wasting time with the 1896 version of scrolling TikTok. It's estimated he gave 300 speeches to 750,000 people who all came to him. Meanwhile, others were helping him to get the word out around the country, and that approach won out. Front porch campaigns popped up a few more times, but by 1932 it became commonplace for candidates to actually campaign for themselves. Eventually, as technology like radio and TV became more popular, presidential hopefuls adapted their campaigns to fit these new forms as well. And with each advance in technology and campaign strategy, presidential hopefuls have had to work to strike the right balance between being accessible to the public and upholding the decorum of the office of the president. They needed to be proper but not distant, accessible but not too accessible. Kind of like Michael Scott, they had to think about whether they would rather be feared or loved, or both. As their public reach expanded, presidents found that technology and access to the public was helpful not just for building support for their presidential campaign, but also for building support for their actions while they were in office. And that can be an important presidential strategy. With the separation of powers, cooperation between the legislative and executive branches is vital. To pass their legislative agenda, the president needs to compromise or persuade enough of Congress to get on their side of issues. But if presidents are facing a divided Congress, or Congress disagrees with the president, they can go public by raising support for their agenda directly among voters, rather than working privately among Congress. If voters support the president's ideas, then members of Congress who depend on those same voters for re-election might feel more pressure to approve the president's agenda. Presidents have used this strategy in a variety of ways. For example, Teddy Roosevelt viewed the office of president as a sort of bully pulpit, or a position of authority that's used to speak out about something. The presidential bully pulpit gave Roosevelt the platform to advocate for his agenda. On the other hand, if presidents already have public support and approval, they can communicate with the public to strategically solidify their presence as the leader of the country. A famous example is Franklin Roosevelt and his fireside chats, where Roosevelt used the radio to speak directly to the people. It was 1933 and banks in Michigan were going to close for a few days. No biggie, right? Ethel and her husband George lived in Maine, so they weren't normally concerned about what happened all the way in Michigan. Except it was the height of the Great Depression, a few years after the big stock market crash, and 25% of the public was unemployed, including George. So Ethel and George weren't playing around with what little money they had left. By the time they heard the news, people had already started pulling money out of their own banks, scared they'd be the next to close. When a bunch of people pull their money at the same time, it's called a bank run, and that could cause the already fragile banking system to collapse. So more and more states put restrictions on banks, which made people more and more terrified. This was all happening around the time President Roosevelt was being sworn in. 2 days later, he suspended all banking activity and called it a bank holiday. 3 days after that, he signed the Emergency Banking Act and called on the Federal Reserve to help banks reopen. Pretty busy first week in office. But Ethel and George were still concerned about the safety of their money. On March 12th, just days after the act passed, Roosevelt came on the radio to reassure the nation that their money would be safe in reopened banks. His fireside chat reached an audience of tens of millions of people. Houses up and down Ethel streets were filled with the sound of the president's calm ASMR voice. Assured by FDR's words and actions, people showed up en masse to redeposit their money the next morning. And it turned out Roosevelt was right. The Dow Jones soon experienced the largest single-day increase in price ever. FDR's 30 or so fireside chats were an unprecedented use of the radio. By explaining current events in a common language and really engaging with the public, FDR was able to get people on board for his New Deal initiatives, like creating 69 new government agencies and countless jobs. Perhaps the most important effect of the fireside chats was their ability to help people feel closer to their government during such desperate times. People felt a certain camaraderie with FDR that changed the way they interacted with the president moving forward. After all, when we elect a president, we're picking someone to represent us on the domestic and international stage. When considering candidates, we have to think about how they present themselves as people as well as politicians. So some people want a president who is more formal and who will be able to represent the country well among other important leaders around the world. They're looking for a certain gravitas in the office of the president. Others want a president that's more representative of the average US citizen, if that really exists. So the ultimate test for them is whether or not they can sit down and have a beer with the candidate. When appealing to this democratic value, candidates want to appear approachable, like one of us, even if the average candidate in the 2016 and 2020 elections was really a billionaire. That's one reason why presidents and other government officials have started using social media. Not only were sites like Facebook, Twitter, RIP Twitter, and others the next evolution of technology that allowed presidents to communicate with the public, they also allowed presidents to interact with the public more directly, at all times throughout their campaigns and time in office. They no longer needed a scheduled appearance or a broadcast. They could just post their ideas online at any hour, or all hours of the day. In 2008, Barack Obama used Facebook and Twitter throughout his campaign. Because 2008 was still early days for modern social media, Obama's use earned him the coveted title of the first social media president. Obama's social media presence helped young people see him as relatable, and it let him show off the charisma that made him a relatively popular president. In fact, according to a Pew survey, Obama was named the best president in their lifetime by almost half of surveyed millennials, who grew up using social media alongside Obama's campaign. Then Donald Trump took social media use to a whole other level during his campaign and presidency. Trump made extensive use of Twitter to ensure that everyone knew his stance on issues ranging from foreign policy to kafefe. In 2020 alone, Trump tweeted and retweeted more than 12,000 times. But accessibility can also come with a few drawbacks. For example, character limits often restrict presidents from being able to make nuanced statements. A tweet from the president doesn't carry the same gravity as a speech, and social media can be misused or overused. Trump's social media accounts were eventually temporarily locked in January 2021, after years of racist, misleading posts that culminated in claims of election fraud and inciting a violent attack on democracy. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat recognize the power of a president's social media presence, and that this communication with the public could also be dangerous. Following Trump's presidency, President Biden has been noticeably quieter on social media, and his posts tend to be more formal. Biden's approach provides a different view on the balance between accessibility, charisma, and decorum in the presidency. In the last few decades, media and social media have continued to change and evolve, as have our knowledge and views of elected officials and their roles in society. And presidents aren't the only ones building platforms and sharing information online. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez frequently uses social media to show the behind the scenes of her job in Congress, and many people appreciate her approach to her role and her use of social media to engage with the public. So social media and increased access to the president and other leaders isn't going away. But as technology keeps evolving, political figures will find new ways to use these tools to share their messages, which will continue to impact how the public views and responds to leaders. And in order to lead effectively, they will have to strategize about their role and the ways they engage with the public, providing valuable insight without oversharing. If you're enjoying Study Hall, Power and Politics in US Government and are interested in taking an online course and earning college credit, go to gostudyhall.com or click on the button to learn more. Thanks for watching. See you next time.